I came across Luke 16:15 when I was reading this morning, and it illustrates a couple of things as well as being a very insightful verse. But let me go through what it illustrates first in terms of Greek. Notice what it says. The exalted, and then you have this prepositional phrase in the first attributive position. Normally, prepositional phrases are in the second attributive position, but in this case, it's in the first. It's no big deal. The exalted among mankind, abomination before God. So I'll come back to actually what this verse means when I'm done here. But what I wanted to point out was in this very simple sentence, there's a lot of interpretation that's having to happen. And it's the kind of interpretation that a first-year Greek student can generally do fine. But if you're reading your English thinking in your translation that it's reflecting Greek structure and it's not interpretive, it's simply not possible. And again, this is a very basic verse. I could illustrate this with almost every verse in the Bible. But look at all the interpretation that has to happen. First of all, the article turns the adjective into a noun, the exalted. Well, that's not English. So the what? Well, you have to interpret. That which is. Now in English, that's a relative clause, right? But this isn't a relative clause, but we have to turn it into a relative clause. So it's a level of interpretation. And because ta is neuter, we could say that which, but again, interpretive position. That which is exalted, now en usually means something like in, but it can also mean among, especially when it's a plural, which this is. But notice what you have to do is that you have to interpret anthropos. And the interesting thing is in both the ESV and the NIV, remember these discussions, we came to a basic decision on how to translate anthropos. But a different situation is when anthropos is in contrast to the divine. In other words, you may decide to translate anthropos as men or, males, men, man, something like that. But when it comes in contrast to the divine, that's a different situation. This is one of the few situations where I'm okay with the word human, because human divine makes a good contrast. I don't like the word human. I think it's kind of an ugly word, just personal preference. And I would never I would rarely translate anthropos as human in general terms. But when it's in contrast to theos, how are you going to translate? Well, maybe you're going to translate mankind when anthropos is in contrast to theos, but not generally. See, in other words, there's an interpretive position, and this is a special situation. But then when you continue, you realize there's no verb. Well, abomination is in the predicate position. Any first-year Greek student would know that. But you have to supply the verb is. Estin right here, right? Well, you may look at the English and see is and think there's a verb there. Well, there's not. And then the final thing you have to do is enopion. Enopion, according to BDAG, has two basic meanings. It means to either to be before something, or it means to be in the presence of something. Well, that's an interpretive decision. And if you look at most of the translations, they say something like in the sight of or in the eyes of God. So they're interpretively taking the second position. I mean, you have to take one, right? There is no one meaning for enopion. There is no, quote, literal meaning for enopion. You've got to interpret it in light of its semantic range in terms of this particular context. So that's a lot of interpretation going on, isn't it? Now, again, the meaning is not, it's obvious, right? That which is exalted among mankind is an abomination before God. But look how much interpretation there was. and look at how you cannot see the Greek structure through a word-for-word translation. Now, word-for-word translation would be the, in, men, exalted, abomination, well, whatever you can do with this, before the God. Well, that's literal, right, in that sense. Again, if you've been watching my channel much, you know how much I dislike the word literal because it doesn't mean what people say it means. Now, the interesting thing in this verse is actually goes beyond the Greek, and that is, this is quite a statement. And I challenge myself, as I challenge you, to look at the things that I value, the things that I pursue, the things that I spend time on, the things that I spend money on, the things that I think about or perhaps even long for in my thought world. Are those good things or are they bad things? Are they things that are exalted in the world but detestable in the sight of God? Just take learning Greek. Is learning Greek a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I think is often the case. A lot of it has to do with motives. If you're learning Greek so that you can climb the academic pecking order ladder, if you're learning Greek so that you can lord it over your students and over the people in your church, if you're learning Greek because of arrogant issues, then knowing Greek becomes an abomination before God. But if you're learning Greek to truly know God and His Word better, then I think that's outside the scope of this verse. But the point is, even good things can be an abomination before God. Something to think about.